Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
I think that the rising cost of college, affordability issues also have contributed to some of this anxiety that people feel about we have to be doing everything all the time or our kids are going to fall behind.
Hey friend, I am so glad you're here. I'm Julie Lyles Carr of the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. We are rolling around in season 9. Can you believe it? I can't. And when I think about those early days when we started the podcast and the age of some of my youngest kids, I was in the absolute thick of it, not just because of the number of kids, but because of all the activities and things we had going on, all the things we were doing as a family. I have to tell you, being in the season of life I'm in now, where I actually have a handful of evenings at home, it's kind of magical. And that's why when an email came across my desk for a new novel that's come out, her author, this novel's author, has some really interesting things to unpack with us about what mothering is looking like today, what some of the pressures and expectations are that are really kind of a unique season in history. I was like, absolutely, we got to have Christine on. So I can't wait to introduce you to my new friend, Christine Gunderson. Christine, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, give the listener a little understanding of who you are, where you live in the world, what you do, all that.
Well, my name's Christine Gunderson, and I am a mom of 3, and I live sort of along the shores of the Potomac River in the Washington, D.C. suburbs, which is where my first novel, Friends with Secrets, is set, and where my next novel, Behind White Picket Fences, is set also. And it's a fascinating place to live. We have Secret Service agents, FBI agents, government workers. We have all kinds of really interesting people here in the D.C. suburbs, and that's one of the reasons that my book is set here. But also a lot of moms, a lot of families, and again, I'm a mother of 3, and motherhood is something I know intimately, and they say you should write what you know, so that is what I do.
That's what you did. I lived in D.C. for a period of time during high school. My dad was the governmental liaison for his company for the space shuttle program, and so we were in D.C. He worked in Crystal City. We lived in Vienna, and it was, Christine, an absolutely fast. I loved living there, and to your point, I went to school with kids who had such diverse backgrounds in terms of one gal, her dad was the ambassador from Pakistan. There were kids who their parents were in various levels of government, elected officials, diplomats, I mean, all kinds of things. And then my dad's work in terms of working with the space shuttle program. So it was really a fascinating melting pot. And for me, a very pivotal time. We ended up moving away in my middle of my junior year, but my brother met who is now his wife. They were just little junior high, early high school kids when they met and went separate ways. And her dad was in the military and on and on. And then years later, circle back. And that's where my sister-in-law comes from. And so many decisions I made and in terms of the friendships and the connections that we made there. So I love that your novels are set there because it's such an important place for me. I can visualize a lot of it. You know, we don't often, Christine, have folks on who have done fiction works. Sometimes that intersection, even though I am a huge fiction reader and love to read, and I'm an author and a writer, all that stuff, all things words, I love it. But a lot of times we can have a book we love and a fiction book we love, but the crossover into really talking about it in terms of how it's germane to motherhood, the connection might not necessarily be there. I was so delighted when I realized that you were really delving into something that, boy, I have experienced, I'm sure you have seen a lot of, which is the increasing pressure on moms today. Even though we talk a good game, Christine, right? We talk about, oh, no, we're not looking for perfection anymore, and we're not going to shame people, and we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do that. Still, just the societal expectation of getting our kids to all the things, academic, athletic, extracurricular, all the things we think they're supposed to be engaged in. Tell me what started for you, a deeper look into that issue and how it began to spin itself into a story about 3 women who decide, you know what, we're done with all that. So tell me about the genesis of that, because it is so right in the center of what a lot of women are asking today, which is, why are we doing all this stuff?
Yeah, it's a topic that is near and dear to my heart and most of my mom friends. And my first book that was inspired by my story, where I had had some really interesting jobs in government. I'm a former television anchor and reporter, and I quit all of that to stay home with my kids. And so that transition from being a working person out in the world, being recognized, accolades, to being a stay-at-home mom was a really difficult transition for me. And so I talk about that transition in Friends with Secrets, my first book. But in my second one, Behind White Picket Fences, I wanted to take a look at the way that motherhood has changed over time. And I think that those of us of a certain age, those of us who grew up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, we remember this childhood where you were out running around, riding your bike, and mom was like, come home when the street lights come on. And you'd come home at dusk and you'd sit around the big TV in the middle of the living room that was actually a piece of furniture
The cabinet
with your
TV.
whole family. Yes, you
Classic.
didn't have a whole lot of homework, and you went to bed. And the activities that you did were not necessarily organized activities. And if you played sports, maybe you didn't actually really seriously start having practices and things until you got a little bit older. And then those of us who were raised in an environment like this and grew up like this had kids of our own, and suddenly it's, there's soccer practice 3 times a week and there are games all weekend, and the homework load is something, boom, get home from school, sit down, we got to get the homework done because then we have to run to the soccer practice, and then we have to run to scouts, and then we have to run to this and we have to run to that. And I know that raising my own children, it has often felt like I was sort of not raising children but curating perfect adults who would be prepared for this future, which is almost impossible to imagine. And I began to realize that a lot of us were doing all of this running around from a place of love, obviously, but also from a place of fear. And I think that fear comes from the fact that the world has changed so much, especially now in these past few years with the advent of AI, that we no longer even know what it is we're supposed to be preparing our children for. Should we tell them to be electricians? Should we tell them to get a college education? What exactly does the future look like? And I feel like as parents, we don't know the answer to that anymore. And that manifests itself in, okay, well, if we don't know what to prepare for, we're going to prepare for everything. We're going to do everything. We're going to do chess. We're going to do soccer. We're going to do robotics. We're going to do scouts. We're going to be in everything. So that's sort of at the heart of what I wanted to tackle in this book. I wanted to compare motherhood in the past. And so there are parts of this book that are set in 1965. And I wanted to talk about motherhood today with these crazy demands on parents and on kids and on our schedules, and sort of take a look at how we got there. And now that we're here, what do we do about it?
Right. I just have to reflect as you were talking on my upbringing, and the majority of my childhood was spent in California outside of Los Angeles near Edwards Air Force Base, because again, my dad, space shuttle program. And so we were in an aerospace community. And I got to tell you, Christine, these were engaged parents who believed that education was extremely important. And, they held our feet to the fire on standards like that. But we ran around and played hide and seek till, the sun was just beginning to set behind the Tehachapi's. I mean, it was, I did not recognize it at the time, but it really was that childhood that seems to be so missing today, that we had a lot of freedom. Now, my parents had a lot of requirements and rules. We were not just running wild by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly within the community. If you messed up, somebody's mama was going to tell on you. I mean, that was going to happen. But that is so missing today. Even the notion of just, are they out playing with the neighborhood kids? That's kind of missing too. I curated a lot of play dates, and I have to say some of that was because in the community in which I was raised, even though everybody didn't have the same kind of faith walk or something like that, all these parents, for the most part, expected us to make decent grades, get our homework done. And if somebody was, underage drinking or something like that, people were going to know about it. And yet today, I think part of what happens to us sometimes within community is we don't even really know what the standard is anymore. And therefore we feel like we have to be more involved. We don't know some of the things that might be allowed in someone else's home that would not be okay in our home. And what is our kid going to be exposed to? Because now content's so readily available, so easy to access. So what are the rules in the neighbor kid's home? That kind of a thing. What did you notice about the concept of community, the standard of community, how that all perhaps at one time, without trying to be bucolic and make it sound like it was some kind of utopia, but what has changed in your understanding as you took a look back to like the 1960s moving forward and then to today when it comes to neighborhoods and a support system around you?
Couple of things, in this area. I grew up on a farm in rural North Dakota. And so, yes, my upbringing was very, very different than the upbringing my kids have here in the Northern Virginia suburbs. One of the things that I think a lot of us notice now is that community aspect might be missing a little bit. There are certainly neighborhoods where you still have neighbors who all know each other and the kids are, playing soccer in the street after dinner. But increasingly, we live in places where, for example, the school might not be near the neighborhood. And so, or you have people going to multiple different schools. So the kids might not know each other from school. They might all be going to different schools. There's a lot more driving. So you can't just ride your bike down to the local ball field, right? If you're playing a travel sport, it requires you to get into a car and be driven to an activity. And so the kids no longer have this sort of autonomy and the freedom to create their own social lives, because their social life is not just the kid next door. Maybe it's the kid that they know from Scouts, who is different than the kid that they go to school with, who is different than the kid that they play baseball with. And so then parents are getting involved. And as you mentioned, then parents are sort of responsible for curating these social lives for their children. And so one of the things that I noticed in the past, and I had a lovely luncheon when I was writing this book, a friend of mine, I believe she's 84 years old, and she's an amazing woman, and she invited some of her friends to have a luncheon with me, and they just talked about what it was like raising their kids in the 60s, what it was like being a working woman in the 60s, and it was really eye-opening and fascinating. And I think one of the things that I noticed was back in an era where everybody didn't have a car, and we weren't constantly driving distances to make things happen. Kids had a lot more autonomy, and there was a lot more community. And that's really the heart of this book, is these three women decide to drop out of everything for 1 year and have this experiment. And what ends up happening is they create a community within their cul-de-sac, and everyone becomes involved. The retired people, the moms, everyone sort of creates the kind of community that I think we all long for and remember from our own growing up years. And that's sort of what is at the heart of this book, is we can't raise these kids by ourselves because it's too hard. We have to have a community of other people around us who are all trying to do the same thing, which is to raise happy, independent, healthy kids.
Right. As you were speaking, I thought, as I take a look at the increasing anxiety levels that we see being reported for kids today, everywhere from elementary through getting through high school, college, just the increasing social anxiety a lot of these kids have. I have to wonder, Christine, if there's a convergence there where, because they haven't really had the range, the freedom of movement to go and create and hang out with other kids in the neighborhood and figure that out, because we have been so involved in creating those relationships and establishing those relationships and making sure everything was aligning and on, they haven't had to exercise that level of personal momentum to go out and make some of those friendships and to think through it, because we've removed that element. And I think there's some other elements that get removed as well when we are so closely keeping their schedules just go, 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 go. What are some things that you think might be missed opportunities for our kids when we are scheduled so close to the wire? I mean, obviously, an easy one is, around my home of origin, if you said you were bored, it was an opportunity to learn various housekeeping skills. You learn to not say that phrase. And we do know that there is actually great value in boredom because it does build creativity. But what are some other things that you notice that perhaps in our zeal to try to provide opportunity and experiences and exposure for our kids, we're actually eliminating some things that happen in the margins, in the free time, in the places where we're not so tightly packed schedule-wise. What are we missing?
Well, there's two things that come to mind. One is reading, and the other is, as you said, boredom. There was a study many years ago where it was an engineering firm, and they were looking to hire, they had a bunch of engineers that were approaching retirement age, and they were looking to hire new engineers to come and replace them. And some of these new engineers that they had on board were having trouble performing some of the tasks that the older engineers were able to do. And so they started, because these were incredibly bright people that they were bringing in, and they were sort of mystified by this. And so they started asking them, what kinds of things did you do for fun as a kid? And one of the things that they discovered was that the older engineers had spent a lot of time taking things apart and putting them back together again. They would find an old toaster in the garage, and they would take it apart, and they would tinker, and they would look at it. And that the younger engineers that they were bringing in had not spent time doing activities like that. Just sort of, gee, I'm bored. There's a toaster over here. I wonder how it works. I'm going to take it apart. And so boredom leads to creativity. Boredom gives your chance of mind to wander. Boredom gives you a chance to explore and discover and figure out why. And if we are constantly scheduled, we don't have time to be bored. And so that creativity doesn't really have a chance to develop. And then the other thing too is reading. And I see this with my own kids. My older son reads a lot more than my younger kids. And, the iPhone has a lot to do with that. They are seeing declining literacy levels among kids. And part of it they think is obviously the iPhone. It's so much easier to scroll Instagram and look at 20 reels than it is to exert the kind of effort and focus and concentration that you need to read a book. And I find even as an adult, I am reading fewer books than I did 10 years ago. And I'm spending more time reading little articles on my phone or on Substack instead of reading actual full novels. And so those two things right there, being really scheduled, not having just open free time, sitting in the backyard, staring up at the clouds, being bored and exploring and tinkering and learning new things through that experience, and reading. Those are two big differences that I think are going to have some repercussions for us as a society in the future. Now, granted, when I was trying to set up all the technical stuff for these podcasts, I had to ask my kids. I'm like, guys, I need this adapter thing. This won't plug in. What do I do? And they're like, oh, Mom, and they immediately help me. So clearly my kids know way more about so many things than I ever will. But I do feel that open time and boredom and the ability to explore are a commodity that is in short supply in our modern world.
You think that you are in the final round of getting all this parenting done. You've got kids who are in high school, you're starting to think about college, and you're thinking, this is it. I'm Julie Lyles Carr. I'm a podcaster, and I'm a mom of 8. And here's what I want you to know about George Fox University. It's a different way of doing college. Why? Because yes, it's all about getting a fantastic degree to set your kid up for their future. They have 60 undergrad programs available at George Fox University. But that's not where the story ends. It's also about equipping them spiritually. If you get out of college with a degree, but you don't have a closer relationship with God, that obviously is going to deeply impact what your young adult life looks like. So for your kiddos, I want you to consider, what would it mean for your child to be able to go to George Fox University, where 93% of George Fox students say they now have a closer relationship with Jesus? George Fox University is located in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon. They have 23 Division III athletic programs, and 100% of students at George Fox University receive financial aid. George Fox University is dedicated to their promise. They want every student to be known for who God created them to be. So listen, parents, you are getting into some of those final laps, but you definitely want to make these last laps count in a big way when it comes to the legacy of your parenting. So be sure and check out for your student, georgefox.edu. That's georgefox.edu.
Yeah, truly, truly is. And when I think about some of the massive leaps forward that we made technologically, say over the last 500 years, when I look at some of the time that was available to some people to be able to think through some things and to take us that next little step and that next little step, because there weren't so many distractions. It's kind of fascinating to go, wow, have we almost painted ourselves into the corner a little bit? Because people would see a problem, they'd try to figure out a better way to fix it, a better way to engage it, something that would make life more efficient. And those things took time. It took experimentation. It took a certain level of stick-to-itiveness that is really hard for us now because we're so accustomed to being able to flip through the minute we get bored or frustrated. Our brains just really aren't being given what they need in terms of essential vitamins, if you will, to be able to deal with the frustration and the work that it does take to stay with something that's a little bit more difficult. There's a lot that's coming out today now as well about how short form content our brains really love because of those fast dopamine hits. And yet the importance of making sure, even if we're going to be on our screens, to engage with longer form content where we have to concentrate a little bit longer. We have to hold the thread a little bit longer. And those are just some things where, maybe you're not trying to eliminate all screens from your kid's life or from your life, but require a little bit more even through the screen so that you're not falling into some of these more short form content kind of debacles that are probably not that great for our brains. I wanted to ask you too, one of the things that I love that this novel does, that it hits on, I've spent some time and have seen it now multiple times in my own life, this phenomenon that we started identifying a few years ago and now seems to be accelerating, what's been termed the walk-away wife syndrome, where a woman just has had it up to here. She feels like she's been doing all of it on her own. She feels like there is not connection in the marriage. She feels like the demands of the kids and on and on and on. And people that you would have never expected who do love their families, but they just hit a certain point of burnout and they make some decisions that are pretty catastrophic to where their family has been, simply from a place of feeling like they can't carry it all anymore. What I love is that your three protagonists, they don't do that. They choose a middle ground that really helps identify, hey, it's the system, it's the hamster wheel, as you call it, that is the problem. It's not necessarily all the feelings I'm having about it. It's identifying and get granular on what the real issue is and how do we go to fix that. So there's a lot of hope to me in the fact that, hey, if you are feeling overburdened, if you feel like there are things in your marriage that aren't supportive of the lifestyle that you have started living by the calendar with your kids, if there are activities, who says you have to keep doing it that way? The permission to say, we're going to get off this wheel. What made you decide that these women would choose that instead of what we sometimes honestly see celebrated more, Christine, which is like walking away from it all? What about them made you go, no, these are three women who are going to find a true solution, a true middle ground, and get to the core of what's happening?
I really feel like community is sort of the answer to so many of these problems. And I wanted to write a book where people solve this problem with community. And I also feel so strongly that other moms are sort of what get us through so many of these difficult times. And I wanted to write a book where there are so many books about romantic relationships. But I feel there aren't enough books about female friendship and the strength of female friendship. And so I wanted to write a book where these families band together as families to solve this problem. And I was discussing some ideas with my agent, and she had a friend who had just decided to sort of step off the hamster wheel and start homeschooling. And so we started talking about that. And this is something I've never done it. I've never homeschooled my kids, but it's certainly something I'd fantasized about over the years. And so I just started, like all good book ideas, start with two words: what if? Well, what if you really were going to just say, enough, we're dropping out of all of this? What would that look like? What would the consequences be? Where would the pushback come from? What would be really difficult about this? And so as we kind of discussed it, and I just started writing the book, in some ways it's sort of wish fulfillment in a way. So I sort of got to try my dropping out moment without actually doing it with my family, but I got to do it on paper. And I do want to say too, I think that part of what is driving some of this is I did a lot of research as I was writing this book, and one of the things that has sort of contributed to some of this is the rising cost of college education. As college has gotten more expensive, more and more people have sort of started to feel like, well, scholarships in sports are one way that we could offset the increasing cost of college, which has become very expensive. And so then we started to see travel sports. And people are saying, well, if I can get my child on the right travel team, that's a higher level of play. And if they're really good, then they can play in college and they can get a scholarship, and that's going to help offset the cost of college. And of course, again, this is the sort of thing that sort of fuels this. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how to prepare my child for it. I don't know how to pay for it. But you know what? If we are playing soccer 7 days a week and my child is really good at it, then this might be one path to help prepare my child for the future. And so I think that the rising cost of college, affordability issues also have contributed to some of this anxiety that people feel about we have to be doing everything all the time or our kids are going to fall behind.
Right. And, in my first book, I actually talked about some research about, and this is not to discourage anybody, but in terms of the very slim odds that your kid's ever going to be the superstar XYZ of whatever, which is not to say that you shouldn't put a kid in an activity that they love. And yes, there are those stories of those kids who really go on to create career and it really does pay for college, whatever. But you have to be realistic about what the actual statistics are, because I certainly have known, I myself have fallen victim to, you're spending so much money on the travel team or the competition, whatever, and all in hopes that maybe there will be some elusive breakthrough scholarship, whatever, that you can actually be kind of shooting yourself in the foot unintentionally because you think that this could be a path forward. I find too that part of the hamster wheel, Christine, is sometimes our own unrealized dreams and aspirations that we want to try to create through our children. What did you notice about that within yourself, within potentially some of these characters, within the research that you were doing when it comes to all the stuff we're trying to accomplish with our kids? We've talked about that fear of the unknown for the future, wanting to make sure they're prepared for everything, the cost of raising kids in college, and maybe this could be an avenue. And what role do our own unrealized aspirations play when it comes to all the things that we're trying to do with our kids?
I think that's such a great question and such a hard question too. I know that, I think as mothers, we always do this, right? If there is something that we love and has meaning for us and has brought us great joy, we want to share that thing with our kids, right? And so whether that thing is Jane Austen, I am always nagging my children to read Jane Austen, and no one has yet to do this. But yes, I'm almost ready to give up on that, but haven't quite yet. Or musical theater, or golf, or baseball, or if it's something that we have loved and we feel it has enriched our lives, it is natural, I think, as parents to want to share that with our kids. And I think the problem comes in, obviously, when we are imposing this thing that we love on our children rather than sharing it with our children. And I do think we all probably have seen parents who are sort of attempting to live through their children's accomplishments. It was a dream that for whatever reason didn't come true for them, but they are determined that this dream will actually come through for their parents. And I think some of that is just self-awareness, and some of that is also the ability to be honest and say, okay, I was a fantastic baseball player, but, my kid would really rather do track and field. And it's sort of an acceptance that our children are not extensions of ourselves. Our children are their own unique individual people with their own interests and their own talents. And we have to give them the freedom to explore the things that they love and that are going to enrich their lives. And those things might be very, very different than the passions that we had when we were their age or that we still have as an adult.
I had to smile to myself because since your protagonist get off the hamster wheel and move into homeschooling initially, I homeschooled all of mine all the way through. And one of the things that is a cautionary tale as well is now homeschooling community has become very robust, which is wonderful. But you can end up back on the same hamster wheel if you're not thoughtful, with a variety of homeschool co-ops and conferences and on and on and on. And so I don't want ever the message that's really central to this to get lost, because no matter what we're doing when we're trying to make these kind of changes, yes, sometimes we need to completely change the environment. And if you are in some kind of system where it's just going, and the answer might be to take a break. As I said before we started recording, Jerry Maguire it, like do something completely different and try homeschooling or try something different. And yet then also the caution that we can so easily then turn whatever that next chapter is into the same kind of thing if we're not careful to make sure that we really are staying alert to all of the ways that we can get pulled into things that are more complex, even when we don't intend to, even when we know we've learned a hard lesson. But boy, sometimes we have to learn a lesson a few times. So, well, Christine, I can't thank you enough for being on today. And I'm so excited for you for this new novel coming out. Where can the listener go to find the book, find out more of the work you do, all that kind of stuff?
Well, it comes out June 9th, and it's Behind White Picket Fences. And you can order it on Amazon or wherever books are sold.
Love the cover. It looks fantastic. And do you like for people to come over and hang out with you on social media? Are there some places like that that you like to interact?
That would be awesome. I have a newsletter called Notes on Love and Laundry, where I talk about motherhood and some of these issues. And you can find that on Substack, or you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. I'm at Christine Gunderson.
Fantastic. All righty. Well, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate this conversation. And I know there are so many women who are trying to figure it all out, beating themselves up, thinking if they just had more grit, if they just had more caffeine. And maybe it's not a matter of more. Maybe it's about subtracting some things that aren't working for your family. So thank you so much for this insightful look at it, this parable about how to carry forward in a way that maybe is better for the family. I really appreciate your time and your creativity.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great.
Absolutely. All right, friends, you know what to do. You're going to want to go find Christine's stuff and her social media and all the things, Substack, all of it. So go over the show notes, because that's where Rebecca puts all that great information every week, links it out, the whole thing. So go check it out. Do me a solid, please. Please subscribe to the podcast, grab this link and send it to a friend who really would benefit from hearing today's guest and what it means to get off the hamster wheel with all the extracurricular stuff and all the busy to get back to really the good stuff in life. So be sure and do that. Send that link, give us a like, 5-star review, leave a comment. We love it when you do that. I love it too when you come over and hang out with me on social media. I'm usually over on Instagram. That's where I usually hang out, Julie Lyles Carr, and also AllMomDoes. AllMomDoes on Instagram, AllMomDoes.com. You know what it is. It's a fantastic community of women just like you, trying to figure out all the same stuff about family, about faith, about work, about marriage, all of it. So be sure and check out all things AllMomDoes, and I will see you next time on the AllMomDoes podcast.